Welcome to Phenomenon Radio, the show that covers thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of physical and mental exposure to this worldwide phenomenon. Hosted by Emmy award-winning investigative journalists, Earthfiles reporter and editor Linda Moulton Howe, and world-renowned experiencer of the 1980 Rendlesham Bentwaters incident, John Burroughs. And now, leading off tonight's program, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
Before I knew anything about the worldwide animal mutilation mystery linked to non-humans, I remember the first time I ever thought seriously about something from outer space coming to Earth and actually interacting with people. And that was the UFO incident. It was 1975, and I watched this TV program, and it was a docudrama reenactment of the alleged UFO and non-human encounter that Betty and Barney Hill described occurring in the White Mountains of New Hampshire on September 19th to 20th, 1961, about a half a century ago. The UFO incident so provoked my interest that I got the book that the broadcast was based on. That book is entitled An Interrupted Journey, written by John Fuller, and first published in 1966 in cooperation with Betty and Barney Hill and the psychiatrist who did their hypnosis, Benjamin Simon, MD, in Boston. Barney Hill was very afraid that night in the fall of 1961 when he stopped the car and got out with his binoculars. He was looking at a disc-shaped craft about 80 feet above him, and there, in a window backlighted by blue-white light, he could see a gray-skinned humanoid wearing a hat who had eyes like a cat's with vertical pupils. Barney felt the cat-eyed being's eyes were taking hold of Barney's mind and mentally warning him not to reach for the gun he carried in his pocket. Then Barney had the distinct feeling he and Betty were going to literally be captured by the cat-eyed entity. And the black husband and white wife were captured, taken aboard a craft with gray-skinned beings that subjected them to a variety of medical tests. The gray leader showed Betty a three-dimensional star map that we would call a hologram today. Betty didn't know where our sun and solar system were in the alien hologram, but she remembered seeing solid trade route lines and dotted exploration lines that eventually she drew under hypnosis. Betty was so accurate that later an amateur astronomer, Marjorie Fish, could construct the beads and wires for that part of our galactic neighborhood and identified the two main binary stars Betty thought was the gray being's home planet. They turned out to be Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, a binary solar system about 37 light years from Earth. So Dr. Simon did 11 hypnosis sessions with Betty and Barney Hill beginning on February 22nd, 1964, and ending 4 months later. So it was the first documented case in what has been called the human abduction syndrome, in which non-human entities take humans from bedrooms, cars, yards, parks, and other human environments into round rooms aboard what the human abductees assume are craft from outer space in this universe controlled by the non-human entities. But some abductees also wonder if they are in another dimension completely outside this matter universe. During these events, human subjects often describe medical examinations, extractions of sperm or ova, mind downloads to and from the aliens, and sometimes telepathic download sessions from the alien intelligence in front of three-dimensional screens, holograms, and wall maps. But why were Betty and Barney taken by the gray-skinned beings, no matter where they were from? What are the characteristics that people have who begin having experiences with an alien presence from about age 4 to adulthood, and often continuing on through most of the person's life? In 2018, human abduction investigators think one of the dominant reasons for who gets abducted is in the family bloodline. Either the alien intelligences are tracking, monitoring some genetic evolution related to specific family tree bloodlines, or coming from the outside in, maybe some human bloodlines are hybridized, the result of a manipulation of DNA in already evolving human generational lines for reasons unknown. But one whistleblower in 2018 told me that one U.S. government agency estimates that the current number of human ET hybrids on Earth right now is around 30% of the 7.2 billion human population. There are no clear answers, but our guest on Phenomena Radio today has been seriously studying the many questions about the human abduction syndrome since he was a co-founder in California in 1994 of the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support, also known as Opus. By 2008, the Mutual UFO Network extended its mission to study more than the nuts and bolts UFO craft and their propulsion systems, to wanting to do a systematic study of the human abduction syndrome that had been linked to UFOs since at least the 1961 Betty and Barney Hill case. So MUFON formed an Abduction Experience Research Committee of scientific and professional disciplines that was charged with developing a comprehensive research strategy and program. That 2008 committee is and was chaired by Les Velez. 9 years ago, Les worked with 2 psychologists on a new MUFON study to compare a group of known abductees with a control group. That study and its conclusions are even more relevant today in a global revolutionary time in which political, military, and intelligence forces behind the scenes seem to be trying to finally open up the truth that humans are not alone in this universe, never have been, and that our very existence on Earth is intimately linked to interactions with and genetic manipulations by one or more alien presences that should be publicly introduced to our world forwardly in order to end the layers of secrecy, deception, and control that have haunted evolving humanity for eons. After this short break, Les Velez will join John Burroughs and me to dig into the MUFON abduction study and what more could be done to expand more investigations of the impacts that repeated abductions by non-humans have in those taken, given added information, and then return to the greater human population with anticipations of possible existential threats ahead on Earth's timeline, and the urgency of all humans waking up to why this planet must be cared for, not destroyed by unconscious carelessness and ignorance.
Thank you, Linda. You're listening to Phenomenon Radio live on the KGRA digital broadcast station. Tonight's special guest, Les Velez, will join the show right after these messages.
Hi, it's AJ from Vibes, Mind, Body, Spirit. Have you been searching for unique items to create or add to your sacred space? What about tools for your holistic healing? Or those one-of-a-kind magical ingredients to manifest your desires? Well, look no more, because Vibes has a variety of items to assist you in your spiritual journey. From crystals to candles, incense to books, tapestries to jewelry, OnlineVibes.com has what you're seeking. We even have some thoughtful and mindful gifts to share with your friends and family too. Visit us at OnlineVibes.com UFOs.com from the comfort of your home, or give us a call at 385-244-1099 to have your order beautifully packaged and sent directly to you or a loved one. And right now, take advantage of the coupon code KGRA at checkout to receive 15% off any order. Remember, online, VIBEZ.com.
When the day comes where the world changes forever, you can be ready at a moment's notice. With Survivalist Camps, the ultimate fully functional off-the-grid survival bug-out house that's completely mobile and ready to go. All the comforts of an RV, but custom built to outlast any other trailer. Learn more at survivalistcamps.com. Due to overwhelming response, limited inventory is available. Be ready with survivalistcamps.com. Survivalist Camps, providing your basic needs to survive.
Hi, Vancouver. George Norrie here, inviting you to join me and producer Tom Danheiser on June 30th at the 4th Annual Architects of the New Paradigm Conference. This will be a groundbreaking, jam-packed event featuring Stephen Bassett, Grant Cameron, Richard Dolan, Daniel Sheehan, Johnny Enoch, and Victor Vigiani. You don't want to miss this one, so watch the 3-minute video and get tickets at anpconference.com. That's anpconference.com. anpconference.com.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRAradio.com.
You're listening to Phenomenon Radio, live on KGRA. Welcome back to tonight's interview with Les Velez. To start tonight's interview, here's Linda Moulton Howe. Linda?
Hey, thanks, Bill. And welcome, Les Velez, to Phenomenal Radio with John Burroughs and me. It is great. I've known you going back a couple of decades through all of the work you've done in MUFON, and I think that it is extremely valuable what you have been trying to do with Opus, because the people that I've interviewed in the human abduction syndrome, which I now estimate is about 1,600 in my career, and that in this kind of bell-shaped curve, I have certain impressions of what dominate in terms of concerns or what downloads have been telepathically over the almost 5 decades that I have done these interviews. And that right now in 2018, what I get the impression is the current angst in the human abductees who are contacting me by the hundreds every month by email and hard letters. Many of them don't want to be on computers. They write me. Some are exquisite. Some, that they were crying when they wrote the letters. And they are people who know that their life has been touched by something they don't understand. And they hear you, me, John, others talk on radio and television. And they think that they are in this syndrome and that there is agony in most of them. And we want to go into what you have done over the last decade in this MUFON study. But right now, I'm curious if you could take and start and launch off from your own current perspective on people who are coming out of the woodwork in greater numbers than I've ever seen in my career about instances involving lights and buzzes and being taken up in beams and being in something they don't understand, and so many left with a residue that we are at a very crucial moment in Earth's timeline when there might be an existential threat in the future.
Linda, thank you very much, first of all, for having me on your program this evening. This is an incredible topic. You're right. There's been a lot of people coming forward. There's like a quickening going on at the moment. Yeah. And these people, most of the time do not know where to turn to talk to people. Oftentimes, family situations are not very supportive. And certainly the mainstream mental health community is not open to a lot of this. They prefer to prescribe drugs to ameliorate the situation. But what we found with the Opus organization, to give these people a place where they can talk with other people having similar circumstances in their lives. These circumstances, as you've indicated, in many cases can be quite dramatic and upsetting. And it's a reality that is beyond our normal reality, if you will. It's paranormal, and therefore people are looking to be able to talk with someone that has a feel for this type of a topic. And as you mentioned earlier, we've seen a lot more, a big increase on so many levels and so many things coming forward. The topic of consciousness has been a real factor of late. And I think that what we're trying to understand in a better way that we did with the omega-3 study, which we'll talk about in a bit, is to understand the individual experiencer and try to understand what makes them different than the rest of us that have not had that type of experience. So we're hoping to better understand that in the next study, which we're hoping to get funding on, called the Omega-4 study. How clever of us from the Omega-3. But, the bottom line is we want to help these people. We want to support them as best we can. And one of the factors that has been proved to be extremely helpful is our online support group, which is totally confidential, whereby these people can talk to one another 24/7 and tell the group about their individual experiences, but also what's happening, on a regular basis. Matter of fact, just today I was looking at the site and people are talking about what happened last night. Right. And it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, the correspondence, I have over 20,000 individual emails that have come in, over the decade, and it's probably even higher than that. But what I know for sure, it's at least 20,000, and it's just phenomenal to see the information that's coming forward, and there's a real commonality. When you look at the overall picture, certainly there's differences with each of the individual situations, but the overall effect and the story that's being told, you can really boil it down to a number of things. And so for me, it's been very gratifying to be able to, I think, help these people, and also to now start to better understand what's happening.
Yeah, and Les, you were kind enough to send me a copy of the Omega-3, a comparative study of abductees, experiencers, and community controls. And on page 20, there's this breakdown of the summary, essentially, of the categories in which the abductees fall. Sensitivity to alternative realities and altered states of consciousness, early paranormal or psi experiences, higher reported stress, conflict, tension, and or psychosocial trauma in childhood home environments, which is basically abusive homes, greater tendencies toward disassociation as a coping style, possibly related to the abusive homes, psychophysical changes in body states and mental functioning, Kundalini energy experiences, attitudes, beliefs, and values shifted more toward a new openness to life, a shift toward universal spiritual beliefs as opposed to traditional religious beliefs and faith traditions, greater ecological concerns and concern for planetary welfare. I know that is a big one in the people that I've interviewed. And finally, a sense of a purposive, which means an intelligence with purpose, involved in participants' lives and in earthly affairs, with this intelligence often seen as extraterrestrial in nature. And what I thought we could do is let's unpack each of these in terms of detailing. And let's go back to the first one, sensitivity to alternative realities and altered states of consciousness. And what I would like to add here was in an email to me just last week. It was a person saying, I hear everybody talking about consciousness. And the person said, I know that I'm conscious as I'm writing this email to you. What does it mean to say that the UFO phenomena is about consciousness with a capital C?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think what we're talking about here is the fact that there's another level of consciousness that people are experiencing. And we are opening ourselves up to a much broader understanding of what consciousness is. It's beyond just, sitting at your desk and looking at your computer. It's all of a sudden understanding that there's something beyond that, beyond your room that you're sitting in, beyond the city that you're in, beyond the atmosphere that we're in. It's going out. People talk about the fact that the universe is a conscious entity. And so I think the definition is changing substantially, and to a good thing, I think. I think that, I always think about what is reality? I mean, we talk about being here on this planet, where you are in Albuquerque or where I am in Texas. But there's something beyond that. I mean, it's beyond the universe even. They talk about the Big Bang. Yeah, but what's before the Big Bang? It's something that I think we're continuing to define what consciousness is. And people talk about the fact that there's two factors to consciousness. One is awareness, and the other one is a sense of feeling. So, believe me, I don't have the answer on that one for sure. But the bottom line is we're trying to pull that apart and try to understand it as best we can with what we've done so far. But then we need to go further. And so some of the things that we're going to try to do in the next study, I'll outline quickly if we have time later on in the discussion.
Well, Les, one of the common themes, in addition to great concern about the planet, that is probably in the 1,600 people that I've interviewed, I'd say 70%, 80%. It's high. They have great concern about the future of the planet. There is concern that something is going to happen, that there will be a great depopulation. Then the other track that dominates in the work that I've heard is that, here's the phrase, there are so many more dimensions than humans understand. Dimensions that are incomprehensible to the human mind. They go beyond the matter universe that we are in, as if we knew the true nature of the cosmos, the way fractals continue to evolve in endless and infinite spirals, that the matter universe is encased, is the verb, encased in a series of dimensions. Now, are those dimensions like a universe? Or are they completely and totally alien to us? And that when people in the abduction syndrome say, Linda, I don't know, was I taken in a craft to another planet? Or did I go to another dimension because it felt like I wasn't in this universe?
Yeah, I've had a couple of cases that I've worked on that people have been supposedly taken through the wall of their home. And what it sounds like to me is that we're talking about a not a physical body actually going through the wall, but a spiritual component of the person. And so the factor of consciousness and spirituality, and not a religious type of a thing, but a spirituality, the soul, for instance, is actually being taken through the physical wall. And so it's the kind of thing that you have to kind of twist your brain a little bit and try to understand that we truly, I think, are just starting now to touch the perimeter of the real issue, and that there probably are many dimensions. There probably is a non-physical physicality to what's going on, that there's something else. I mean, you talk about near-death experiences where people go out of their body and they're looking down at themselves and they can tell people afterwards what's been going on. So what is that? So it's certainly something to be cognizant of and add to the piece of the puzzle.
Well, I know that in my book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, High Strangeness, the Greys say to half a dozen people in which they are transferring life force out of one version of the human. And they're saying because you had rheumatic fever when you were a child, your container is dying, but that it is vital, urgent, that the soul in your body continue to live in the same type of container on this planet for another period of time that only the gray beings seem to understand what they're talking about. The abductees don't. But the abductees get demonstrations of what they call the resurrection technology, and that they are allowed to see how they're going to be dead, they're going to die, but that the life force in them, perhaps the soul spirit, it's sketched as being gold light, about 3 feet long, that comes out of the back at the top of their spine, moves across a room into a series of tubes with light at the top and the bottom. And in those tubes, the abductees say, I recognize humans. I recognize they're showing me the body I'm going into. It's going to be 10 years younger, and it's going to be healthy. And then there are other tubes in other parts of this vast place that are not humans. They are different types. And that in this process, one woman extended her arms to me, and she had been being abducted in terms of consciousness since she was a young child. And this was an event that took place about in her 40s. Where they are showing her that she had rheumatic fever and that she is going to die, and they can't allow it. That the entity, which she understands is her soul spirit, must stay married to this specific container. And I'm focusing toward the bloodline question here in a moment. Mm-hmm. That it is vital that the soul continue in this very specific body container for an X amount, and that they even showed her that a man that they demonstrated this process, and she got to see the light leave his body. They said telepathically, all of this is telepathically with images, that he was being allowed to die in his hometown in Wisconsin. A funeral would be had and he would be buried. But what was being buried would be the body container, which to the Greys was not as important as the marriage of the soul spirit, the gold light, with another version that they had made with rapid cycle cloning and were preserving in these tubes of light. And they showed the man's entity, went into a body that was 10 years younger than the one that was allowed to die. And the Grey said, we're putting him down in southern Australia. He will never cross any of the people in Wisconsin. And therefore, everything will be in Wisconsin as normal life. But he will continue in Australia. And the same idea to her. All of this, Les, is a huge box, a lens through which to look at the abduction syndrome and the question, what is, at this point, MUFON and your perception on the bloodline tracking and why in all the abductees that you've studied and heard from, what is it that an alien presence is doing, monitoring, manipulating bloodlines of humans?
Well, I think it's part of the hybridization process. As you said earlier, you've been told that there's a possibility of 30% of the population has already been either a hybrid or hybridized to a certain extent. And I think that that's part of the process that's happening. You hear about the aliens following people with military backgrounds, with Native American backgrounds, and a lot of it is along the female. I mean, there's certainly been in our investigations more females than there have been males, which is kind of interesting to me. I'm not exactly sure why that's the case. But
let me just throw in a question. I read your entire report, and it said that the profile of the abductee in this study would be white, Caucasian, female, and in her 50s.
Yeah. And again, this is something where the group that we were presented with, that we were able to obtain at this point, turned out to be of that nature. One of the things that we want to do in the future is to do this with a larger group of people, and hopefully more diversified if we can, to get a better statistical analysis of the phenomena. Again, this is a work in progress, and certainly one that, at this point, the conclusions that we've come to are quite interesting, and we'll get into that later on, because there are some interesting ones, including, what we found with regard to the temporal lobe activity. But we'll get into that.
Yeah, before we get into the medical part, which gets a little difficult to understand, let's keep unpacking this fascinating list.
Linda?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, John.
I'd like to ask him a question before we move on from that.
Sure.
And I don't have access to all the work you've done, but are you working through MUFON on this?
This particular report, the Omega-3 report, we did actually MUFON funded it, and two psychologists that I know were the main investigators that did most of the number crunching and the work with regard to the questionnaires that were done. And so it was really remarkable, because this was at a time that MUFON was switching over their thinking process from the nuts and bolts type thing to understanding that we should really be listening to what the abductees are saying, because they have some incredible information to pass along. I pushed them to, hey, I think this is something we should do. And we kind of set up a group, the AERC, the Abduction Experiencer Research Committee. And from that, actually, Kathleen Martin now is heading up the abduction research group within MUFON, and kind of gave them the basis to kind of go forward with looking at this topic.
Okay, so just I'm curious because Bigelow at one point had some involvement with MUFON. Any of this, was it ever funded by Bigelow? Did he get any of the results? No. Is any of this involved To the Stars or Gary Nolan?
To the best of my knowledge, when this happened, which was like 2009, when we actually presented at the symposium in Denver, MUFON Symposium, to the best of my knowledge, the monies came only from MUFON. It had nothing to do with Bigelow. Now, when we made that presentation, MUFON has that study, okay? And whether or not they passed it on to him is a whole another question. I truly do not know.
Well, that's an interesting point, because one of the things that To the Stars is highlighting is they're going to go into the abduction, experiencer part, and they have certain reports. So I'm curious if that's maybe one of those reports, or do you know who Dr. Gary Nolan is?
Yes. He's
is he involved in this in any way?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I met with Grant Cameron last month over at the UFO Con in South San Francisco, and he made his presentation. Afterwards, I came up to him and I introduced myself and told him what I had. And I had heard about the fact that Gary Nolan was actually doing a study with experiencers, including yourself, from what I understand, and putting together some type of a report. And I said to Grant, I said it would be really great if he could see what we did here, and could you get it to him? And he said he would. And I do not know if that's actually transpired. So I, this has been really synchronous that's going on right now. I mean, this is all starting to come together, and the reports that I understand that they looked at, Gary and Kit Green, were reports from the organization called FREE, F-R-E-E, that had taken, I think, over 1,000 people that felt that they were abductees, and did a more of a nuts and bolts type of a report, as opposed to more of a psychological one. But anyway, they're parsing that data from what I understand.
John?
Yeah, no, that makes some sense, because I mean, I think everybody's aware that at one point, basically everything MUFON did, Bigelow got all that information, and it does seem there's a three-prong attack by To the Stars, which is videos, materials, and then the experiencers. And well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about these bloodlines and stuff as we go forward, because that's part of what they're looking at, is bloodlines and how they interact and how they could connect, and the antenna part of it and everything else. So go ahead, Linda, with the next part that you wanted to move forward with.
John, that was a perfect word to bring up. The antenna metaphor, Les. Antenna having to do that on our planet, whether the 30% hybrids would be in the category, all of them as an antenna, I don't think I would agree with that. I think there is a percentage of hybrids and a percentage of, we'll call them roly-poly Homo sapien sapien, that for some reason are, which goes back to why you started doing this in the first place, they are the focus of the alien presence. And that's why they're called antennas, that they are either broadcasting or receiving from these other layers of advanced or whatever intelligence we're dealing with. And that why is it that there would be this antenna aspect of only a small percentage of humans?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to, what we found in the study, and that the group, if you take a look at the overall number in the study, that these people did have something different going on with their brain, and basically the temporal lobe and limbic system was being showed a different difference from the control group. Now, whether that would be called an antenna is a good question. We never talked about anything like that in this study, but the bottom line is that there's something different going on, and what is it that is the reason for that? Is it the fact that their blood is A negative? There's been a number of studies with regard to the fact that a lot of these abductees have A negative, and so it's all the pieces are starting to kind of fall into place, and we have a different. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, could you please explain right now what the temporal lobe is, what it does in a normal person, and what you have found in the abductee category?
Okay, now you got me. Okay, because with this particular study, okay, and I'm quickly running through the study right now to come to the actual paragraph that explains this a little bit better.
Persinger and his colleagues have offered a neurological basis for extraordinary encounters, arguing that the temporal lobe and the limbic system are involved in or the major source of such encounters.
Well, yeah, to a certain degree. And what we found was that this can be actually assessed through paper and pencil questionnaire that is quite well accepted, and again, I'm still looking for some more information because I want to answer that question for you better. Here we go. The brain generally, and the temporal lobes and limbic system more particularly, play a mediating role in anomalous experiences such as abduction. This in no way implies that abductions are all or only in the abductees' heads. Rather, it points to the likelihood of temporal lobe lability as a preset or a precursor to extraordinary experiences. While it would be too reductionistic to claim that the brain creates such experiences, it is not far-fetched to think that the brain plays an important role or important part in the who and the what of extraordinary experiences and how they are interpreted.
It says, right, what it does seem to point to is that temporal lobes are more sensitive to electromagnetic changes in the environment, and possibly to that would be the relationship. Sensitivity to magnetic field changes might be part of the major interface with whatever the aliens and their technology are.
Correct. So, and one of the things that we want to do in the next study is to really look more closely at that part. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to get this information out there, specifically at the time anyway. I was thinking Gary Nolan to take a look at this and then perhaps get involved with the next phase, which again would be focusing more on that part of it. The psychologist, Dr. Lelivre, who was the main investigator here in this study, unfortunately passed away, and which is such a tragedy. I mean, he had some health issues, so it wasn't totally a shock, but at the same time, it was a shock that he passed away. And he really was the spearhead of making this report happen. And so he basically outlined the whole omega-4 study as to how it would be conducted and what we would be looking at. So I have that information as well.
And you know what is a very interesting chicken and egg question here? Would the temporal lobe be a focus of genetic manipulation by advanced intelligences who are trying to get life throughout the universe that can interface with it, be manipulated by it, be more easily plucked up by its beams? In other words, there may be something that's truly a key, like a car ignition in the temporal lobe that is sensitive to magnetic fields.
You know, that's a very interesting concept, Linda. That's very good. That rings true here. That gives me something more to keep in mind as we go forward with this. That's very good. Very good.
I would like to know more about that too, because the temporal lobe, I don't think it was fully understood 40 years ago when they were doing these studies to say, oh, was it temporal lobe epilepsy? Remember, that was one of the big things or something?
Right, exactly.
And now today, as your study, which seems very valuable to read and reread, that this issue of the temporal lobe being something that is going to be subjective to magnetic fields. And then there was the other aspect that is, in addition to the temporal lobe, you were also looking at, was it the limbic system?
Right, yes.
And is there a parallel in the limbic system, like the temporal lobe being sensitive to magnetic fields? Is the limbic system itself in chemistry or physics related to interface mentally by people?
Well, you know, again, I'm not I don't have the medical background to answer that question, but you know, as I said before, I was the main facilitator in making this all happen. And this is the kind of questions that going forward, you know, I'm very much interested in trying to get the right people to really look at this and take it to the next level, the next step, to understand, okay, you know, we talk about antenna people. So what is the antenna? Is it the temporal lobe? Is it the limbic system, or both in conjunction with one another?
Yeah, this is fascinating because when you go to the issue of timeline, if the DIA guy who told me back in December 1999 is correct, 3 competing extraterrestrial civilizations have been terraforming, harvesting genetic material, mining metals, and manipulating DNA and already evolving Earth life for as if this is some huge laboratory experiment in which there are vested interests by competing, we'll call them advanced prime intelligences for lack of any other understanding. And that means that our planet at 270 million years, we are supposed to be a species that may be standing up primates are 2 million years old. At the most, Lucy in Africa. So if you put 2 over 270, look at that fraction.
Yeah.
Okay. So the idea that we are babies and that our government and political systems have taken advantage of the fact that humanity has been deliberately kept out of the loop. It's been kept out of the loop by the non-humans. It's been kept out of the loop by this strange 1% that seems to have had a chokehold on the evolution of this planet for the last 5,000 years at least. What is that interface in terms of what might be happening today behind the scenes Because, Les, this is my question. It feels like if the political controllers of Earth, non-human and human, do not open up this huge, huge truth that we're not alone in this universe, and that there's all kinds of manipulation, and some of it positive and some of it negative, and that our souls may be the key e-ticket that everybody wants in this universe, I think that humans then could have their own existential threat because they have no knowledge to be strong and analyze what the hell's going on.
Well, there's no question that knowledge is power, and without that knowledge, we don't have the power. So it's something that and those people that are in quote unquote power want to keep that power, and I'm sure they would like to make sure that the rest of humanity is not aware of the true facts.
But doesn't it feel like a bit of an old museum with dust everywhere when you look at, even though it was an important crack in the policies of denial, December 16th, New York Times above the fold, but the idea that we've had 3 infrared, somewhat controversial jet fighter gun camera videos. And it's almost as if, all right, that's enough. Nobody needs anything more. There's something dusty and museum-like about that approach when it feels to me that 2018 is a completely different branch in the timeline for all people everywhere. This is revolutionary, and nobody has the patience for being treated with dangling tidbits.
Yeah, and I think what's going on right now is the fact that we're getting these tidbits, and supposedly more tidbits are coming our way. And whether or not you want to call it a desensitization process, or the fact that, you know, when these gun camera videos were released, you know, supposedly they came from the Defense Department, but then the Defense Department denied it. It's like, you know, we are being fed things, and then there's plausible deniability going on at the same time. So how long does that go on until such time that, as you say, the dust is cleared? You know, what I've heard is that within 7 years, and again, I always cringe at anybody talking about timelines, you know, that it's going to happen, but that within 7 years we will know the true story, so to speak.
Hey, can I jump in on that one?
Yeah.
Where did you hear that from? Can you divulge that?
I heard that. I want to say, and I could be wrong. So I think I want to say Grant put that out there, Cameron, at some point.
Okay, so basically Grant's repeating what's been passed on to him. And the reason why I ask is because one of the questions I want to ask you before I say anything more is, have you done any work with Kit Green? Because you brought his name up earlier.
No, I have not.
Okay, did you look at the MRI study that he was doing on the brain where you guys were just talking about all that?
No, I haven't had an opportunity to do that. No, I would like to.
Right, because he's looking in that area you were talking about. But there is some information being passed around that 5 to 7 years is the mark that this is going to take. But the interesting thing is that they hope it takes longer, because if it has to be done either before or in that 5 to 7 year window, it's not going to be something that's going to end well for us. So that's why I was curious to know where you might have heard that.
Yeah, I think I did hear Cameron mention that, I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I pose something? John has brought up this whole issue of what could be the closing door, or what is going to determine which branch time goes. And what I'm getting to is what a lot of abductees say, and I'm curious if you have a lot of this. The abductees that are getting in touch with me, and I'm not kidding about it's very clear. Some of them are tears on their inked letters.
Right.
The abductees have a sense of an existential threat, and that the existential threat is related to either a natural geophysical cycle in the solar system, the Earth, the Milky Way, and/or is a cycle of the intelligence that has been on this planet before and is coming back, and that either one could be an existential threat.
Yeah, I've heard both comments made, and I guess I'm an optimist in a way, in that I don't think we're going to see that, or maybe not in that way. And again, that's my gut talking here. I have no, basis other than that to say that, but I've always approached what we do with Opus and the abductees in a very positive way, which has seemed to be very, very helpful to them. You hear so many times people saying, well, we're going to have this great tragedy and it's going to happen on November 5th at 7 o'clock or something. And it never happens. It just never, ever happens. And so, but perhaps there's another reality where it actually does happen. And
let me ask this way, Les. We're on an unstable planet by anybody's definition of the geophysical nature of planet Earth. There are huge volcanoes that have caused black skies, that have caused extinction events. The Earth has been a snowball, literally an icy snowball 3 times in its past. We come and go with ice ages and warming. We come and go in cycles that are still a mystery to many geophysicists. We know that the poles have changed hundreds and hundreds of times, and that we may be in the century where it could happen at the end of this century. All of this is a focus on what is already proved in the history tracks of planet Earth.
No, you're absolutely right. And I'm not saying that that's not the case. It's just a question of, it seems like it's more imminent. And I don't see that as being the case. And maybe I should have explained that better. But I don't see anything imminently happening to us. Yeah, maybe in another century or two, there may be, some, and the oceans, what's happening with the oceans now? They're acidifying. Yeah. And that's supposedly going pretty darn fast. And that could create, fish dying and shellfish, not being able to create their shells because the calcium is being eaten away. I mean, all that kind of stuff. But I think, too, we have the option of correcting some of that, if we take action. And hopefully that will be the case.
Well, there is an argument before we go to...
Linda, I hate to interrupt, but we're past our first hard break, okay. So we really need to take some time off.
And we'll do that right now. Thank you, Linda, John, and Les. This 50-minute uninterrupted segment of Phenomenon Radio is brought to you by OnlineVibes.com, your personal connection to mind, body, spirit, committed to connecting you with healing modalities that can manifest a true and healthy change in your life. Visit the website at OnlineVibes.com. That's vibes with a Z. Tonight's special guest, Les Velez, will be back with Linda and John right after these messages.
Hi, it's AJ from Vibes, Mind, Body, Spirit. Have you been searching for unique items to create or add to your sacred space? What about tools for your holistic healing? Or those one-of-a-kind magical ingredients to manifest your desires? Well, look no more, because Vibes has a variety of items to assist you in your spiritual journey. From crystals to candles, incense to books, tapestries to jewelry, OnlineVibes.com has what you're seeking. We even have some thoughtful and mindful gifts to share with your friends and family too. Visit us at OnlineVibes.com from the comfort of your home, or give us a call at 385-244-1099 to have your order beautifully packaged and sent directly to you or a loved one. And right now, take advantage of the coupon code KGRA at checkout to receive 15% off any order. Remember, online, VIBEC.com.
People are waking up. They're standing up to those pushing pesticides and GMOs as safe alternatives for a starving world. What a bunch of crap! I tell you, I'd rather eat dirt. So, I drink Life Change Tea. It's an herbal drink, cleansing my body of toxic sludge and nasty chemicals, and of course, ridding the intruders that are hidden in my so-called food. And by the way, Life Change Tea is non-GMO and organic. No fillers, no yuck. Just a great defense against you-know-what. May the supplement force awaken you. Don't fall to the dark side. Sorry. I went to the movies last night. Anyway, enough said. How do you get that herbal drink and change your life? GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. You will awaken. You will get stronger, and you might even lose a bit of weight. So awaken to Life Change Tea and the many one-of-a-kind supplements at GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. May the supplement force be with you.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Hi, Vancouver. George Norrie here, inviting you to join me and producer Tom Danheiser on June 30th at the 4th Annual Architects of the New Paradigm Conference. This will be a groundbreaking, jam-packed event featuring Stephen Bassett, Grant Cameron, Richard Dolan, Daniel Sheehan, Johnny Enoch, and Victor Vigiani. You don't want to miss this one, so watch the 3-minute video and get tickets at anpconference.com. That's anpconference.com. anpconference.com.
You listen to us, and we listen to you. And so does the CIA. KGRARadio.com.
Welcome back to Phenomenon Radio, live right here on the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station. Before we begin hour 2 of our interview with tonight's special guest, Les Velez, it's time for the news brought to you by Earthfiles.com. Here's Linda Moulton Howe. Linda?
Thanks, Bill. On March 22nd, 2018, a report in the journal Nature was entitled, Evidence that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is Rapidly Accumulating Plastic. The research was done by the Ocean Cleanup, led by its founder and CEO Boyan Slat, in collaboration with 14 other marine scientists. Everyone was stunned to find that the Great Ocean Garbage Patch equals 620,000 square miles, or about 80,000 tons of plastic trash, which was up to 16 times larger in size than previously reported. And that's more than twice the size of Texas, and continuing to grow between Hawaii and California. The plastic trash and other garbage in the Pacific is expected to keep increasing at least 2% each year unless something is done to clean it up. According to the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, the Earth's global population in 2016 was more than 7 billion people who have been producing and throwing away over 300 million tons of plastic each year. That huge number is expected to increase. So UNEP warns that by 2050, there will be more plastic than fish in the world's oceans. Humans in 2018 are now using more than 320 million tons of plastic. And 2/3 of all plastic is less dense than seawater, so it floats on the ocean surface. When people use the ocean as a trash dump, lots of the plastic stays afloat, and moves in the ocean currents, piling up where the waters naturally spiral in massive vortexes that are called gyres. Eventually, with storms and tides, the plastic garbage washes ashore, covering once clean beaches. Floating at the surface of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch are lots of plastic nets discarded by fishermen, and they're called ghost nets. The Ocean Cleanup Research reports that nearly half, 46%, of the plastic mass in the Pacific Ocean are ghost nets that are constantly entangling and killing marine creatures. Sea turtles can eat as much as 74% in dry weight of their diets in ocean trash plastics. But the plastic just fills up their stomachs, killing the turtles either by starvation or poisons from toxic ingredients in the plastics. Investigations have confirmed that 84% of plastic floating on the ocean surface is now found to have at least one toxic chemical. The founder and CEO of the Ocean Cleanup has worried about the growing plastic garbage problem since he was 16 years old scuba diving in Greece, and he came across more plastic bags than fish there. He started asking, why can't we clean this up? And that question has led to the current full-time career that Boyan Slat now has at age 23. His goal in the summer of 2018 is to first test a system to remove discarded fishing gear and nets. He plans to get a fleet of 60 cleanup systems operating full-time this summer of 2018. He estimates if they all work, he could remove half of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch every 5 years for the foreseeable future. This is Linda Moulton Howe. Please stay tuned to Earthfiles news updates on KGRA Radio and visit every day my science, environment, and Real X-Files news website, earthfiles.com, for more on breaking stories about our universe, this solar system, and the planet we live on.
Thank you, Linda. And that's the news brought to you by Earthfiles.com. And now, back to tonight's interview with special guest Les Velez. Here's Linda Moulton Howe. Linda?
Thanks, Bill. And Les, right before the break, what I was going to bring up as a possible, we'll call it geophysical and solar system change, is we're moving into solar cycle 24. The sun has been going like 6 months with hardly a sunspot, one of the longest times known to science. There are some physicists that I know, solar physicists, and they're betting dinners and all kinds of things with each other that we're moving into a period that will go into a Maunder minimum. We have not seen a Maunder minimum since the middle of the 1600s to the 1700s. And that was a period when they couldn't see any sunspots on the sun. And that's sort of what's happening now. And what would be the consequence if we went into 100 years, like the Maunder minimum from around 1645 to 1715? If I guess that would be 15 years. 50 years. If we went into a period of, let's say, 50 years, no sunspots, a slightly cooler sun, maybe dropping 1% of its energy output, and then causing consequences on the Earth, that it is exactly timed with this period where we are trying to reach out and get to Mars. And one of the consequences of a Maunder minimum is going to be less and less solar wind, weaker solar magnetic fields. And that means cosmic rays, which are already at an all-time high, are going to continue to increase. And they don't know what the consequences of increased cosmic rays on a year-by-year basis will bring.
Wow. Yeah, I don't really know what to say about that other than the fact that, wasn't that same time period there was a cooling going on, and that there was real problems growing crops and things of that nature?
Yes, and that Maunder minimum, that is what that period is linked to, is an ice age, ice age. And the little ice age, there are controversies about whether it was related to sunspots or a volcano. And that is a big argument that goes on to this day. But most solar physicists think that there probably was a decrease in energy during that period of time, 1645 to 1750. It's 15 or 50. It's like 50 or 70 years where there was a decline. Now, the solar physicists also argue that if you rheostat down 1% of the brightness of the sun, which they think is all that happens, they argue it doesn't have enough effect to cause any kind of a serious ice age. But we are on a planet that has had serious ice ages.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, with the warming trend that's going on now versus something like that, who knows? It may be a null factor here that occurs. But I think with the information that we've gotten with the increase in carbon dioxide, which is affecting the oceans and the warming that's going on, I think that there would have to be some significant cooling to offset this thing, unless we start to, use less fossil fuel and use more, green type of energy.
Well, this has all been brought up because of all the abductees who have great, great concern about our planet and who talk about the possibility of an existential threat. And on your own list in page 20, it is that in your study, that one of the areas that you find that the abductees express is great concern over our planet, and that they turn into Earth lovers who want the environment to be cleaned up and protected.
Oh, absolutely. That is certainly one of the factors that we found. And maybe at this point, I could kind of go over some of the more depth, some of the conclusions that we came to.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. In general, the abductees' experiencers certainly profile differently than do their comparison counterparts on a number of general psychological and specific neurological variables. Yet there are remarkable similarities between the experiential group and the comparison group. It should be noted that in no case did experiencers or comparison group participants show any signs of mental illness or personality disorder. And that was obviously a very significant finding. One of the things that people talk about, these people are just, fantasizing. They have fantasy issues. Well, fantasy proneness does not appear to play a differentiating role between the experiential and the control group. However, sensitivity to alternative realities and early and recurrent paranormal or psi experiences seem to play a role in the abduction experience. Now, here's another part that, was interesting. Childhood conflict, psychosocial tension, and abuse. People have talked about sexual abuse as being one of the factors. Well, we didn't find any of that in this particular study, but certainly psychosocial tension and trauma, people can, growing up as children, have parents that fight or something like that, can certainly cause tension. I know myself, I had parents that occasionally got into it, and I kind of got in between them. And so, although I don't think I'm an experiencer at this point, although I've been told that twice by people in our support group. I'll go into that maybe later. Anyway, as I was saying, this trauma then likely facilitates a dissociative coping style in later life. And again, that's not a psychopathological dissociative effect. how much a part dissociation plays in the abduction experience remains an open question, and this is one of the things that we would like to look at. But Ring and Rosing, which was another group that looked at this abuse, trauma, dissociation pathway, it still remains a viable descriptive, if not explanatory, principle. Both experience with and interest in the abduction phenomenon have impact on how one's body is perceived to function, how one views the world and one's purpose in it, and how one defines or redefines one's faith, tradition, and beliefs. In essence, both experience with and interest in contact seem to change one's sense of self and one's worldview. Excuse me. And this goes back to what you were just saying, that they really feel that, we have to be better to one another. We have to be better to the earth and, to Mother Nature. And that if we don't, this is going to be a serious issue. Experiencers, abductees believe that there is a sentient, purposive alien intelligence at play, which you mentioned earlier, in their lives and at work in the world. What the intelligence's goals are seem to be more beneficent than malevolent, which is that's an interesting factor because, if you look at Jacobs, most of the stuff has been very negative. Other people have found, like John Mack, that it was very, very positive. More benign. What we found is that it's more benign than malignant. This, though, remains an open question and a point of doubt in the minds and hearts of some abductees' experiences and some comparison control participants. It also remains a point of contention among abduction researchers. And again, going back to the John Max and Jacobs and the late Bud Hopkins.
And what you mean is that there are cases in which the abductee is convinced they are dealing with evil. And then there are other cases that swing the other way to angelic. And that in between, there is a big ground in which people sense that they are dealing with things that may not be evil, but that they really don't care about us, except that we are filling some need.
Yeah, exactly. This, it's such an incredible topic to get into and to try to understand. And there's so many facets to it. And, as we were talking about the brain generally, and the temporal lobes and limbic system more particularly play a mediating role in the anomalous experiences such as abduction. This in no way implies that the abductions, and I read this earlier, I guess, are all and only in the abductant's head. Rather, it points to the likelihood of temporal lobe lability or a preset or a precursor to extraordinary experiences. And I won't read the rest of that because I read that earlier. A more thorough investigation of abductees' experiences is warranted, and this is what we'd like to try to do in the Omega-4 study. These individuals are given both a gift or blessing and a penalty or curse that allows them to experience what the typical person cannot. They are different. They are special. This study answered several questions, but offered several others. For example, given the differences in how abductees' experiencers interpret their encounters, are there differences in the character, temperament, and or personality structure for those who remain troubled by their experiences and those who appear to see them as positively transformative?
Unless we right here at this juncture of what you just read, we have not begun to discuss the various types of non-humans, of which there are many and categories, and our own government categorizes them. And the idea that there could be an 8-foot tall praying mantis that is part lizard that shows up in a ball of light in your living room is it's incomprehensible. And yet, those are the kinds of events that are in the human abduction syndrome that we all humanity needs to understand at least what the governments know about balls of light delivering praying mantises into living rooms.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned balls of light, because I had an experience in Sedona, Arizona, where I don't know if you're familiar with Tom Dongo.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I met him there because I wanted to discuss the Bradshaw Ranch with him. But in that process, he mentioned a woman that was able to take videos and pictures of these balls of light and these serpents supposedly in the evenings. And so I actually went over there, and she would get a feeling that something was about to occur, and she would take her camera and she'd start just taking one picture right after the next, not being able to see it with the naked eye. But when and these are digital cameras that she was using, these things would show up on the film, and she took these things and blew them up. And I almost fell out of my chair when I saw the blow up of this one particular orb. You could see your typical gray alien, like one close to, if you will, a portal.
Right.
This orb being a portal, and then another one behind it looking in another direction, and then a third in further in the back. Well, that wasn't enough. And then she showed me a picture of me sitting there. We were out on her balcony, and we were taking these pictures over the canyon. And she took 2 consecutive pictures of me, and over my head was this orb, and it was red. I've never seen a red orb. And it had like this little yellow cap on the top of it. And the first picture, this little yellow cap was straight up. And then in the next picture that she took right after that one, just a few seconds later, it had turned probably about 30 degrees. So it was tilting further to the right. And she would feel these things. So, you know, here's the case of an antenna person being able to understand something is going to happen, starts taking pictures. You know, what is that capability?
Well, I lived in Sedona for 2 years, and I met people like that too. And there definitely is that stuff going on up there. And the pictures, I've seen pictures of it. I've been involved in a couple times when we actually visually saw stuff. And at the end of the day, there appears to be people that you can be around that can attract this stuff in. So it's hard to understand. And you're right about the red orbs being up there. I've seen them myself.
And the temporal lobe could be the key, you guys. If the temporal lobe is the part of us that is sensitive to magnetic field changes, then that could explain the people who say, I feel that something is here. I feel that I should get a camera out and take a photograph. And the Bradshaw Ranch, just in a sentence, has been for 4 decades, a place reporting UFOs, animal mutilations, and a wide range of phenomena.
Oh yeah, I mean and pretty scary stuff that have occurred there as well.
Give an example. What has been the scariest?
Well, I think what it is that they kind of like what's happened out at the Skinwalker ranch type of thing, where, you know, portals would open up, beings would come through that were pretty scary looking, and, you know, certainly orbs of light.
Reptilian or insect or humanoid or...
Yeah, it was certainly not humanoid. It was not humanoid. It was more animal.
Okay. And so the Bradshaw Ranch and Skinwalker Ranch. Skinwalker is in Utah. Bradshaw is in Arizona. But both of them could be in this category of what are called places where magnetic field lines of the Earth naturally collapse periodically. I've had a discussion about this very subject with a Martin Marietta engineer years ago. And he said that he had worked on a project in which our government was going to various places that they had identified where magnetic fields would suddenly collapse. And they knew that things from someplace else came in when they collapsed, and that he was an engineer involved in a project. One was in Sedona, that he was there directly, and he was telling me firsthand. He said, we built a small building out of solid brick and stone with all kinds of interior layers. And there was a piece of equipment in there generating a frequency that was designed to keep the magnetic fields in that spot from collapsing, because it was one of the natural spots on the Earth, just exactly like what Philip Corso said in The Day After Roswell. He said there were 9 places on the Earth that had been found to collapse, magnetic fields that would collapse periodically, that our government was very concerned about.
Yeah, that's, it's amazing, the information that's out there, but it's like all these pieces need to be brought together in some cohesive manner that, can be looked at by a group of people that have the ability to try to understand at least what's going on. So this little thing that we're doing here with the omega-3 and hopefully the omega-4 study, and maybe hooking up with the Gary Nolans of the world, or at least that type of a person, to really try to understand what's happening, but also ultimately to help these people better understand, because they come to us all the time and say, why me? Why am I having these situations and you're not? It's quite interesting. I mean, I've learned so much, sitting in support groups that we've put together and listening to these people talk about their experiences, which are incredibly dramatic. I had a couple, I'll just relate this story quickly, that they were both amateur pilots, and they were off picnicking in a state park near Santa Cruz, California. And it started to get to be dusk, and so they were coming out of the park. And this park has an elevation that goes from sea level all the way up into the hills near Santa Cruz. And they noticed this light over the ocean. And so they thought at first, they thought it was a plane. Except it kept getting bigger and bigger and getting closer and closer, until finally it was over their heads, about 500 to 1,000 feet over their heads, and it was a triangular craft. And so they observed this thing go into a little canyon behind them, and it sat there, bobbing up and down and going side to side, the old butterfly effect that people talk about UFOs doing. And they noticed another light over the ocean, and shortly thereafter, this second craft came over their heads. And the first one, they looked at it. The second one, they felt it was looking at them, and went into the valley back there and sat there and did the same thing. And then all of a sudden, they just kind of went up on their sides, and it's like they went around a corner and they just disappeared, like they went into another dimension of some sort. Well, after that occurred, they decided, okay, they were pretty shook up by it. They started to go out of the park, and that's the last thing they remember until they ended up at a restaurant, a number of miles down the road. And they basically had 3 hours of missing time that they couldn't, right, accommodate as to what happened. And then they came to this support group meeting, and they told the group about this experience. And then they pulled out some pictures of a rash that had developed on their body after this. And almost without exception in the group, people said that they had a rash similar to that at one point or another after an abduction. And one of the people in the group said, well, I know what that's from. And we said, "Oh, okay. What do you think it is?" And he says, "Well, it's the effects of the solution that they dip you in to sanitize you when they bring you on board the craft."
Well, that is a common description that I've had in my own work for 30 or 40 years. But there is a brand new insight from the Cuban embassy problem, which I've been doing a lot of work. And it is that infrasound, they are identifying that UFOs, in addition to terahertz, they are emitting frequencies in the infrasound, and that what going all the way back to APRO, in 1971, that Carl Lorenzen and they put out a bulletin that went into microwave, infrasound, and ultrasound. And one of the features that was being discovered in 1971 was that the frequencies that had been measured off of UFOs could warm underneath the skin and turn it red because of coagulation of blood caused by the frequency.
Interesting. Yeah, they actually had gone to two different doctors, because the first one they didn't buy what he was telling them. One said it was something external, another one said something internal. And so perhaps maybe it was an internal thing, such as what you just explained. Yeah. Very interesting. That, this whole journey that I'm on right now, trying to better understand this has been absolutely fascinating. And
well, Les, did they penetrate the 3 hours of missing time? Did they ever have vivid dreams that explained what had happened? Did they have telepathic downloads? Did they see symbols? Did they see hieroglyphs?
Yeah, they had a lot of strange dreams, but it was really interesting. They got to a certain point in the support group, and then they basically stopped coming. And then I tried to follow up with them to see about perhaps doing some regression type work, because we do make that available to people as well.
How could people listening be able to interface between you and Opus and what you're doing if they feel like they'd like to do hypnosis?
Sure. What they need to do is just contact us at our website, which is Opus, OPUS Network. That's one word, opusnetwork.org. And you'll find a place where you can request whatever you were looking for, and we'll get right back to you and try to give you what you're looking for.
And do you have people interfacing with Opus in every state of the United States?
We have, in a lot of cases, not all. And if we don't have someone, we will do research, and we will find somebody that is either familiar with the topic or is open to working with people that are having these kinds of experiences. Because one of the things, certainly that we found, back in 1994, was that the mental health community, or even the medical community, was not very open to working with people like this. The majority would say, well, go to your psychologist or psychiatrist and let them prescribe some drugs for you, which is not the solution by any means. Right. These people are having real experiences that need to be dealt with as best we can, given our knowledge at this point. It's something that, we're all working to try to better understand it, but we don't have all the pieces by any means.
Well, one of the pieces of the phenomena that has always stunned me is the surgical, like a scalpel incision or excision of time, if I can use that metaphor. And I'm thinking of a case in which a woman, this goes back all into the early 80s, but it's so vivid. I remember this moment. She was telling me that she had been in her car and that she was in the abduction syndrome to begin with. But this is what happened. She was worried about a police car. She was trying to drive a little above the speed limit. So she was very, very attentive about the needle. And she remembered looking at her speedometer, worried about the speed and getting a ticket. And she sees the speedometer needle blur. She lost, I believe that was a 2-hour missing time. And when the interview had been done with, I don't remember if Leo Sprinkle did this case or not, but you remember there was a group that people called upon, that they were looking at, Leo would tell me, it's important for me to interview anybody, Linda, that you want to bring to me, because I'm looking for those sentences that are where I'm going to enter in the hypnosis. And when this woman said she saw the speedometer needle blur, that was the entrance point in the hypnosis that opened up this huge 2 hours. Wow. The same thing happened with Judy Doherty. She said in an interview with Leo and me before we did the 4-hour coverage of her hypnosis session, she said, I felt like I was in two places at once. I remember I felt like I was standing next to my car, but I was somewhere else. Leo told me that's where I'm going to enter into the hypnosis. And these are these strange, precise, surgical points. How do they do that? How do they enter into the timeline that a human is moving in a car? The person looks at the speedometer, it blurs. And in that blur are missing 2 or 3 hours.
Well, the one thing that I think that is they're able to do in some way, shape, or form is manipulate time. That for them, this could be something that occurs, just as you could snap your finger, and yet to our perception, it takes a lot longer. I think there's definitely from the things that I've, encountered with these abductees is that there is a whole lot of time manipulation that's going on, and how they do that. And maybe that's one of the ways they get here from wherever they're coming from. Yeah. If it's extraterrestrial, what is this thing? Is it extraterrestrial really? Is it interdimensional? Is it time travelers like John, is experienced, or is it all the above, or military in some crazy way? I kind of think could be all the above.
I think you meant Jim Peniston, who said that he was shown that what came into Rendlesham was time travelers from 40,000 years in the future coming back here for genetic Band-Aids in order to survive where they are.
Right. Yeah. Excuse me. You're right. Yeah. It's just very, very, very interesting. There's so many aspects to this phenomena. So we're looking at this one particular part, which hopefully in some way, shape, or form will give us a window into some other areas.
Did you, in all of the people, both I think it was 51 in your
control group?
And
71 in the or 72 in the experiential group.
Yeah. Did any of the people, even if it's not all labeled here, in the transcripts of the interviews, or even did you do hypnosis with anybody at all, or was it all you?
No.
Straight, okay.
Yeah.
Now, in that issue of, did anybody bring up that they had been shown in that screen, that we'll call it the telepathic screen of the human mind in its interaction with these beings? Have they been shown or telepathically told that the Anunnaki, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Sumerians were extraterrestrial civilizations based on this planet for real?
No, none of that was indicated, and I did not. Most people, when they filled out this form, they also filled out a sheet of basically their experience, and I did not personally read those particular comments. The only thing that I got after they parsed all the data was the statistical analysis and then the conclusions, which we've been talking about this evening. So that information, is been basically in Dr. Lelevre's hands, and that is something that is now filed somewhere, and unfortunately, I don't have access to it.
Well, it would be very interesting because the government people, the whistleblowers that have talked to me in just the last 2 or 3 years, they're stressing that is part of the truth, that the pyramids on this planet and throughout our solar system and in the Milky Way galaxy have been built by what they call pyramid builders that could be 500 million years old, and that there have been all kinds of prime intelligences that make androids, they make robots, they make cyborgs, they make all this stuff. They go out into our solar system, the Milky Way galaxy, and do work on planets and then claim territory. And it's a whole different approach from where it was 30 or 40 years ago of treading around even just the idea that there was something from someplace else in the universe abducting people. If you put it in the box of gigantic interstellar trade routes, territorial pushing in, putting androids on planets to claim territory, it's so big that in a way, it almost makes sense that they've never explained to humans because it's incomprehensible.
It is interesting how you have these pyramidal shapes, the Mayans, the Egyptians, the Chinese, for instance, supposedly have some really big pyramid structures there, and now this one in Bosnia that supposedly is a pyramid. So they're all over the world, and so how did that happen?
But they're not just on Earth. They're the Cydonia, the D&M pyramid. When you talk with people at NASA who actually aren't trying to spew the party line, they say, yes, that is a pyramid on Mars, that there's supposed to be pyramids on the backside of the moon, and that all of this is part of the policies of denial. We're being treated like 1-year-olds who should not have any knowledge about wars in the solar system, wars in the Milky Way galaxy, genetic manipulation. Who are Homo sapiens sapien in relationship to all this?
And that's unfortunate that that's the way it has to come out, or it is coming out. You want that our government, these organizations should be transparent, but as we know, they're not. And how do we break through there? And I think I forget who was saying it, that it's not going to be the government that's going to make the disclosure. It's going to be private industry that's finally going to make the big announcement.
Well, that's Robert Bigelow. So Robert Bigelow and Bigelow Aerospace is perfectly poised with contracts with NASA that are legal to be the only person who has the right to do the blow up buildings on Mars and on the moon. So he is a private citizen who, no matter how much information that he has on the hard physics side of materials, or the we'll call it the types of non-humans that are underground in a variety of military places, no matter what he's got, nobody can file a FOIA claim to get information from Bigelow Aerospace.
Right, because he's private. It has nothing to do with the government.
And that's what Corso, Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso, said was in operation from Eisenhower on, and that the charter that he had in General Trudeau in the Pentagon, you get this material that we're collecting from extraterrestrial crashes into private industry as fast as possible, and we want it patented to keep it out of the hands of our enemies.
What's interesting about that, Corso doing that, being part of the Eisenhower administration. And of course, Eisenhower at the end of his term there was warning about the military-industrial complex.
Yes.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure Eisenhower, according to some of the people I've interviewed, Eisenhower was the last president who knew everything. And Nixon was his vice president. And that meant that Nixon knew a lot, too. And that it is fascinating that when you start moving into the 20th toward the 21st century, that the big question hangs out there. If Eisenhower was the last president who knew everything, and if John F. Kennedy was assassinated by the CIA because they considered him a threat to national security in the charter of MJ-12, of which the director of the CIA was head, and that anything that would open up extraterrestrials was a threat to national security, and John F. Kennedy was ordering the Dulles at the CIA to get him UFO files, and he wanted to have a collaboration to go to the moon with the Soviet Union. And 2.5 months later, he was dead in Dallas. And all of this now we see. All you have to do is take all of the documents that are existing and put them on a floor. I've done it. And just put 50 feet of the documents and follow the chronology. And when John F. Kennedy was writing that memo, which nobody denies, this is real. This is an archived document. He is saying to the director of the CIA that he wants more information on the files that would relate to MJ-12, and he wants to formalize collaboration with the Soviet Union and go to the moon.
Can I add something to that, Linda?
Yeah.
I disagree that Eisenhower's the last one. I think the last one to know everything is still alive, but he's on death's doors. George Hubert Walker Bush. He headed the CIA. He actually was fired by Carter because he wouldn't give him the full brief. So I would say Bush probably is going to be the last man alive that was in that position that holds most, if not all, the answers.
And he ain't talking.
No.
Well, do remember what happened during when his son was out there running a campaign for the Republican nomination, and he came out and said people couldn't handle the truth.
Yeah, and I wonder which part of this, you guys, both of you, do you think that he was thinking of that we humans could not handle? Which part?
I'm not sure, but I know his son, who became president, when he was asked that question, I think it was by Kimmel, his eyes got about as big as they could be, like bug eyes, and said, yeah, but I'm not talking about it.
Yeah.
And I don't talk to my family or my daughters or anybody about it. So, I mean, I would say, well, who knows what his son knows too, because of the position he was in, and Cheney. But to me, George H.W. Bush probably knew the most because, he ended up being the director of the CIA, refused to give the brief to Carter because he said he didn't have the need to know, and then, became president. So I got a funny feeling he knows more than anybody. And just remember how Reagan reacted certain points and times. And Bush was the vice president during that time frame.
Well, and Ronald Reagan, according to the Serpo material, and this is the transcript of the briefing allegedly at Camp David, March 6 to 8, 1981, for Reagan by CIA, NSA, DIA, a bunch were there. And it boils down to, they introduced Reagan to 5 different extraterrestrial groups. The top one was the Eben with the pear-shaped head, and the next 2 on the list of 5 were defined as clones made by rapid cycle cloning of the Ebens. So we're saying that the next 2 are androids that were genetically manipulated by the one that's at the top of the list. And then what did they do with those 2 that they made? They put them on other planets in other places. It's like extension of your territory without you, the prime intelligence, having to go anywhere. You make the androids that are going to fit with an atmosphere and a gravity and a planet, which is what apparently they did according to this briefing. And the 4th, the hepaloids, are probably the tall whites, but they don't identify anything about the hepaloids. But the 5th The Tronoloid says to Reagan, these are nasty insects that camouflage on Earth as blonde humans.
Huh.
So how complex is this chess game? And the more we are left out, the weaker we become. We need to know the truth, no matter what it is, and let the chips fall where they may. And then this planet might grow up and stop destroying itself, meaning humanity, in all these stupid wars.
We can only hope. We can only hope.
Well, guys, I wish I could give a positive view on that, but in the state we are right now, the way we fight and the division there is in the world, I highly doubt that if they say there's something else out there that's been kept secret for 70 or 80 years, that they'd stand a chance. I just don't think they would.
Yeah.
But it's unfair to us if we've got allies that are helping us, and there is a major duty, we'll call it a hostile alien visitor, as some of the documents say, HAVs, and that's what George Walker Bush meant, then we all should know.
Linda, we can't even get the truth on a simple military operation. Do you really think they're going to come out and go into details about all the different technology? Like, okay, for example, let's just talk about the Bisma that you've been made aware of. That's all being kept secret, even by the group that wants this to become public. Do you understand what I mean?
Well,
To the Stars comes out and says, we hold this technology. We're going to get into it sooner or later, but we can't tell you now. You know what I mean? They throw out these little teasers of videos. Don't worry, stay tuned, folks. We'll get to this later. Bigelow says we'll have confirmation but not disclosure. And the confirmation part says we'll admit we're not alone, but we're not going to tell you what we know, how we know it, and what we have. Do you understand what I mean? Even the good guys that are supposed to be out there in support of getting the public to understand this aren't really playing by the rules that they want everybody else to play by.
And it makes what Les is trying to do with Opus and with these studies even more important, because the only place, Les, that we've ever gotten any unvarnished truth is from the abductees.
Well, and that's the thing that, I think that finally MUFON woke up to, and that is that, hey, we're missing a very important resource of information, and that we should not ignore these people. They have so much that, they're downloading, and, the things that are happening to them are causing them, a lot of stress in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases. And, we need to certainly support that as best we can to help them. And then we need to then take the information that they're putting out there and see if there's something we can do with it. But at this point, I think what we're focused on with these studies, and hopefully the next study, is to better understand what is happening to these people, because if we can understand that, which I think we will get to at some point, then we will have a window into what we do next.
And one of the peculiar ones on your list in this report is that the experiential group scored highest in these areas, including Kundalini energy experiences. For an audience that might not know, explain Kundalini along the spine, and what would this mean on this report?
Well, basically what we're talking about is spiritual in nature, where all of a sudden a person is taken over by an energy that literally comes up the spine, from the base of the spine, all the way up and through the various chakra points. Don't ask me to explain all the chakra points, because I can't, not at this point. But and it just goes up through the person into their crown chakra, and then emanates basically throughout their whole body, and puts them into a state where they're able to understand or to spiritually have an awakening that allows other things to possibly come in and communicate.
Well, is it sort of like the idea, the metaphor, that if, as Bohm said in Wholeness and the Implicate Order, the physicist, all mass is frozen light, and that we are in physics today that is trying to entangle photons so that we would have instantaneous communication, say, from the Earth to the moon, that there really is a reality that if there is a soul spirit fabric, that it probably functions on entanglement with photons and energy frequencies that we don't understand, but the non-humans do.
You've explained it very well, I think, better than I just did. And I think that everything, is energy, light, and vibrating at certain frequencies. And if we can manipulate that, and that's kind of what's going on. There's a frequency that's being generated that's different than the normal frequency, and tends to do, as I said earlier, start at the base of the spine and go up the back to the crown of the head, and again, perception is changed and feelings change, and it's a thing that can be scary to be sitting there and all of a sudden have something like that go on with you. But it's just another thing that we're trying to get a handle on.
Well, it's the epiphany that the astronauts described, most of them Edgar Mitchell the most, that he suddenly had a connection to all that there is and understood that every particle of him was like every particle in the universe, and that if we understood that this is David Bohm's the wholeness and the implicate order. The implicate order are the patterns and the frequencies that are like fractals, but it is the light and the photons that seem to be the energy systems of everything that there is.
That's the type of explanation that is based in science, which again is an interesting way to look at it, and one that it's not far off from the reality of what's going on there.
But I think Edgar had an advantage that everybody else didn't. It was called imagery. But the thing is that he got outside the Earth's gravitational and EM frequency pull and was up there in space. And I think that's some of it right there. And I also believe that there is a possibility we haven't earned the right to do that yet. That's just my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The avatars of history certainly seems to me that their message was always along those lines, that humans were not understanding that the soul was the most important part of us and that it is linked to the entire cosmos.
And one interesting point that all experiencers go through is a spiritual journey. And that's the best way to describe it, is that they start off in many cases very fearful. They come to a point, then the next phase, where they accept what's going on. Then the third phase, they wonder why it's not happening anymore. But during that journey, it's a spiritual journey where they're, talking about how can I be a better person? How can I be better to our fellow man? How can we take care of the planet and things of that nature? So that's a very, very positive thing. And so spirit, soul, they're really connected. And consciousness is another part of that. And there's just so much that is starting to come out now in those areas that I think is super positive.
And on
super way to end it. We're out of time. Thanks for being our guest tonight.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Les.
Oh, you bet, Linda. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right. On behalf of Linda Moulton Howe, John Burroughs, and Les Velez, thanks for listening to Phenomenon Radio. Now stay tuned for 3 hours of Fade to Black with Jimmy Church here on the station that brings you the very best in paranormal talk radio topics on the planet, KGRAradio.com. Good night, everyone.